All right, let's dive right into one of the biggest, most fascinating debates out there, the Apollo moon landings. Was it humanity's shining moment, or was it all just an incredibly elaborate lie?
You know, for more than half a century now, a whole lot of people have looked at this question and said, nope, didn't happen. And that simple answer has kicked off one of the most stubborn conspiracy theories ever. And it's really found its footing in our modern age of mistrust and, of course, the internet.
And that's the core idea we're digging into. You see it right here from a pretty well-known skeptic, Marcus Allen. The claim is that NASA faked it all, not just once, but all 6 times. But before we get into the how, we have to ask the big question, why? What could possibly be the reason for a lie that massive?
So, why fake it? Well, according to the theory, it all comes down to one thing: the crazy, high-stakes pressure of the Cold War.
I mean, you gotta remember, the space race wasn't just a friendly competition, it was an all-out rivalry between superpowers. When the Soviets launched Sputnik back in '57, it was a huge shock to the West. So when President Kennedy came out in '61 and said, "We're putting a man on the moon," that wasn't just about science. It was a deadline. It was about winning a huge propaganda battle. And the theory goes that when the technical hurdles seemed just too high, faking it was the only surefire way to stick the landing, so to speak, and declare victory.
Okay, so that's the motive. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty, the so-called evidence that keeps this whole debate alive. And the #1 source of proof for skeptics? It's NASA's own photos, the images they took right there on the moon. People have been poring over these pictures for decades, looking for anything that seems off. And they found a few things they say prove it was all shot in a studio. We're going to look at the biggest ones right now.
All right, first up, the shadows. The argument is pretty simple. There's only one sun, right? So all the shadows should be perfectly parallel. But look at some of these photos. They're not. Skeptics say, aha, multiple studio lights. But the scientific explanation is actually pretty simple photography. It's an effective perspective, especially with a wide-angle lens, kind of like how railroad tracks seem to meet in the distance. On top of that, the moon's surface isn't a flat parking lot. It's lumpy and uneven, which is going to throw shadows all over the place.
Okay, this next one is maybe the most famous. Where are the stars? I mean, the sky is totally black, but no stars. The argument is the backdrop must be fake. But the answer really comes down to how a camera works. Imagine you're taking a picture of your friend at night, and they're standing under a super bright streetlight. To get your friend in the picture, you have to set the camera for that bright light, right? Well, all the faint little stars in the background, they're just not going to show up. It's the exact same idea here. The lunar surface, lit by the sun, was incredibly bright, and the cameras were set to capture the astronauts, not the faint starlight.
And then there's the big one, the waving flag. Everyone knows there's no wind on the moon, so how is it waving? Well, it's all about how the flag was built. NASA knew a normal flag would just hang there limply, so they put a horizontal bar across the top to hold it out. The waving you're seeing is actually just the ripples from the astronauts twisting and shoving the flagpole into the really hard lunar ground. And in a vacuum with no air to slow it down, those ripples just kept on going for a bit.
So it's not just the photos. People also question the basic physics and the tech itself. I mean, could they really have done all this with 1960s computers and equipment?
You hear this all the time. My phone has more computing power than the Apollo spacecraft. And hey, that's absolutely true. But it's also kind of missing the point. The Apollo computer wasn't built to play games or browse the internet. It had one single critical job: handle the flight calculations. It was a specialist, and it was incredibly reliable. In fact, during the final moments of the Apollo 11 landing, the computer got overloaded with extra data, but it was smart enough to ignore the junk and focus only on the landing tasks. It's what allowed them to land safely. And remember, the real supercomputers doing the heavy lifting were back in mission control.
And what about how the astronauts moved? That bouncy, slow-motion walk. Some people say it looks fake, like they're hanging from wires. But think about it. They were in a totally alien environment. They had these huge, bulky suits on that changed their center of gravity. And they were in 1/6 gravity. The way we walk on Earth just doesn't work there. You'd fall over. So they had to learn this new kind of hopping motion just to stay balanced. It's something they practiced over and over again.
So you hear this quote, he's standing in a pool of light. It's a spotlight. And this brings us back to lighting. This is a really good point from the skeptic side. Look at an astronaut standing in the shadow of the lander. Why can we see him so clearly? If the sun is the only light source, he should be in pitch black shadow, right?
So what's going on? Well, there's another massive light source that everyone forgets about, the moon itself. The ground, that bright gray lunar dust, is an incredible reflector. It acts like a giant bounce card for a photographer, scattering that bright sunlight in every single direction. That reflected light is what fills in all the shadows and lets us see things that aren't in direct sun.
Okay, so we've been talking about the claims and the counterclaims, but let's flip the script. Let's talk about the actual physical proof that was left behind, stuff we can still check on today, 50+ years later.
First and foremost, the stuff they brought back. We're talking 382 kilograms, that's nearly 850 pounds, of moon rocks and dust. Now the theory says, oh, they just found those in Antarctica or something.
But thousands of scientists from countries all around the world have studied these rocks, and they're just not from Earth. They have these tiny little craters on them from micrometeorites hitting them over millions of years. They're zapped with cosmic radiation. These are things that just don't happen to rocks here because our atmosphere protects us. You simply can't fake that. They're definitively from the moon.
And this is maybe the coolest part. The astronauts left stuff up there that we are still using today. They placed these special mirrors called retroreflectors on the surface, and for decades, observatories right here on Earth have been shooting powerful lasers at them and timing how long it takes for the light to bounce back. It's how we measure the exact distance to the moon, down to the centimeter. And here's the kicker. Anyone with a powerful enough laser and telescope can do it. They're still there.
But okay, what about just taking a picture? Can't we see the landing sites with our modern telescopes and satellites? Well, skeptics will say the pictures we have are just not convincing. Just a couple of pixels and you can't really tell what you're looking at.
But the thing is, NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO, has been circling the moon for years and has taken some amazing high-resolution pictures. And you can see it all. You can see the bottom half of the lunar lander still sitting there. You can see the science experiments they left. You can even see the tracks from the little moon buggies and the footprints the astronauts left in the dust. They're all still there, perfectly preserved.
So, with all this evidence pointing one way, why is this still even a debate? Why does this conspiracy theory refuse to go away?
Well, there are a few big reasons. For one, there's just a general distrust of authority and government. The internet obviously makes it super easy for these ideas to spread like wildfire. And, let's be real, it's a great story. A massive government cover-up? That's way more exciting than the official narrative. It really feeds into that impulse we all have to question what we're told.
But at the end of the day, you kind of come back to one simple logical problem. Think about this. 400,000 people worked on the Apollo program. 400,000. The idea that you could get every single one of them to keep a secret that big for over 50 years without a single credible leak, especially with your biggest rival, the Soviet Union, monitoring every move you make, honestly, it seems like it would have been a whole lot easier to just actually go to the moon.
And that really leaves us with a huge question for our own time. As we get ready to go back to the moon and then on to Mars, how are we going to prove it? In an age of deepfakes and AI-generated everything, where you can't trust video or pictures, how do we verify these incredible achievements? The whole debate over Apollo is a pretty stark reminder that for a lot of people, just seeing something isn't enough to make them believe it anymore.